You deserve more than ordinary. She already chose her life. We need your cooperation. Am I under arrest? Not yet.
Harold Rogers was 38, a quiet logistics operations manager from Columbus, Ohio. Most people saw him as the ordinary husband who could never compete with wealth. They believed Eliana Rogers had settled for stability instead of success. Harold still drove an aging Ford Explorer, bought fresh white lilies from the same neighborhood florist every birthday, and wore a carefully pressed navy suit that had lasted him years. What they didn't know was that he had spent 6 months preparing for the moment no one else could see coming. As the rooftop doors swung open, the scent of lilies mixed with expensive perfume, and Harold froze as Nathaniel Sterling knelt before Eliana, opening a velvet box that caught the city lights. If you're watching from somewhere in the world, tell me your country and your local time in the comments. I always enjoy seeing where everyone is tuning in from. And if you enjoy slow burn stories where patience, evidence, and truth matter more than appearances, subscribe now so you won't miss tomorrow's story. 3 weeks earlier, nothing about Eliana Rogers' birthday looked unusual. The email invitation arrived on a Monday morning at 9:14 a.m., just after the weekly leadership meeting at Hawthorne Creative Group, one of Columbus's fastest-growing marketing agencies. The subject line read, "Celebrating Eliana a night above the city." The venue immediately caught everyone's attention. The Skyline Room occupied the top floor of the Meridian Tower overlooking downtown Columbus and the Scioto River. It was a place where corporate executives hosted mergers, professional athletes celebrated contracts, and politicians quietly raised campaign money. Reservations were usually made months in advance. Eliana frowned when she opened the invitation. "I didn't ask for anything this big," she said quietly. Lauren Mitchell leaned against the edge of her desk with a grin. "You never ask," Lauren replied. "That's exactly why we're doing it." Lauren had been Eliana's closest friend for almost 8 years. She was energetic, outspoken, and never afraid to say what everyone else was thinking. If silence filled a room, Lauren usually broke it. Brian Walker, the agency's senior marketing executive, walked over holding a printed guest list. "We've already confirmed almost 60 people," he said. "Clients department heads a few city officials, and someone special." Eliana looked up. "Who?" Brian smiled. "You'll see." Across the office, several co-workers exchanged knowing glances. None of them noticed Harold sitting alone inside his own office across town. At Midwest Freight Solutions, Harold's Tuesday morning looked exactly like every other Tuesday. He arrived at 7:20 a.m. He poured black coffee into the same ceramic mug he'd owned for almost 10 years. He reviewed overnight shipping reports from Chicago, Indianapolis, Louisville, and Cincinnati. His desk remained spotless except for a legal pad filled with handwritten notes. Every shipment, every delay, every route, perfectly organized. His assistant often joked that Harold could remember the location of every trailer crossing Ohio without opening a computer. Harold never laughed very hard. He simply smiled. At noon, his phone buzzed. It was Eliana. "Are you free?" "For you always." She hesitated. "My office wants to throw me a birthday party." "Sounds nice. It's bigger than I expected." Harold smiled while studying a freight map. "You deserve people celebrating you." She laughed softly. "I was hoping you'd say it sounds ridiculous." "I'd only say that if you didn't want it." "I don't know if I do." Harold heard uncertainty in her voice. Not fear, just discomfort. He knew Eliana preferred quiet dinners over crowded parties, yet she also hated disappointing people. "They've already booked everything," she said. "I'll be there, even if it's fancy." "I've survived fancy before," she laughed again. "I love you." "I love you too." When the call ended, Harold returned to his spreadsheets without another thought, or at least he tried to, because something had changed. 2 days later, another invitation appeared. This one wasn't sent through Hawthorne Creative. Instead, it came directly from Nathaniel Sterling's executive office. Harold recognized the name immediately. Nathaniel Nate Sterling, CEO, Sterling Infrastructure Holdings, estimated net worth well over $800 million. Featured regularly in Forbes' Midwest Business, owner of private aircraft, luxury hotels, commercial real estate, major federal construction contracts across Ohio, and Eliana's former boyfriend. Their relationship had ended almost 6 years before she met Harold. According to Eliana, it had simply stopped working. Nathaniel loved attention. She wanted peace. That had been the end of it. Or so Harold believed. Nathaniel's invitation was surprisingly personal. Looking forward to celebrating Eliana with everyone. She deserves an unforgettable evening. No company logo. No assistant's signature. Only his name. Harold stared at the message for several seconds. Not because he felt threatened, because it felt intentional. That evening he mentioned it casually while they prepared dinner together. Eliana chopped vegetables. Harold grilled salmon on the back patio. The invitation came from Nathaniel himself. She paused only briefly. Oh. I thought your co-workers organized everything. They did. So why is he inviting guests? She sighed. I honestly don't know. You could ask. I probably should. Her answer sounded sincere. Harold believed her. He always believed her. Still, something about the situation refused to settle. Saturday afternoon arrived with unusually warm weather. Downtown Columbus filled with families attending the farmers' market. Harold and Eliana walked through North Market carrying coffee cups. They stopped at a flower stand, white lilies. Eliana smiled. You still remember. I always will. My birthday isn't for another 3 weeks. I know. Then why buy flowers today? Harold shrugged. Because they reminded me of you. She laughed. You really are impossible. No. I'm predictable. She tucked one lily behind her ear before the florist wrapped the bouquet. An older woman browsing nearby smiled. Young man, she said, never stop bringing her flowers. Harold answered simply, I don't plan to. Neither of them noticed a black Range Rover slowing across the street. Inside sat Nathaniel Sterling, expensive sunglasses, perfect haircut, tailored charcoal suit despite the weekend. He watched them for only a few seconds before driving away. He never waved. He never stopped. He simply observed. Monday morning brought another surprise. Hawthorne Creative announced Sterling Infrastructure Holdings as its newest strategic client. The office erupted into applause. Brian Walker stood beside a presentation screen. This partnership changes everything, he announced. Higher profile campaigns, larger budgets, national exposure. Lauren leaned toward Eliana. Guess you'll be seeing Nate more often. Eliana's smile faded just slightly. I suppose. When Harold heard the news that evening, he asked only one question. Will you be working directly with him? Occasionally. Are you comfortable with that? I think so. He nodded. That's what matters. She looked at him curiously. You're not bothered. Should I be? Most husbands would be. Harold stirred the pasta sauce before answering. I married you. I didn't marry your past. She smiled with genuine affection. You always make things sound simple. They usually are. But even as he spoke, another thought quietly settled into his mind. Simple situations rarely required luxury rooftop parties. Simple business partnerships rarely involved personal invitations. Simple friendships rarely produced whispers every time two people entered the same room. Over the following days, co-workers began mentioning Nathaniel almost constantly. He's brilliant. He donated another $5 million. He just bought another downtown building. He flies to New York for breakfast meetings. He remembers everyone's name. The admiration grew louder every day. Harold listened without comment whenever Eliana repeated the stories over dinner. He never criticized Nathaniel, never mocked him, never questioned Eliana. Instead, he noticed details. Nathaniel always seemed to appear unexpectedly. Coffee meetings, agency presentations, charity luncheons, ribbon cuttings, always nearby, always visible, always smiling. One Thursday evening, Harold arrived outside Hawthorne Creative 10 minutes early to pick Eliana up after work. Rain covered High Street. Employees hurried toward the parking garage holding briefcases above their heads. Harold waited inside the Explorer with the windshield wipers moving steadily. Then he saw something that made him sit up straighter. Nathaniel stood beneath the covered entrance, speaking quietly with Brian Walker. Neither man noticed Harold. Brian handed Nathaniel a slim blue folder. Nathaniel looked inside. He nodded once. Then both men looked toward the building entrance as if making sure nobody else had seen the exchange. Seconds later, Brian walked back inside. Nathaniel slipped the folder beneath his arm and disappeared into a waiting black sedan. Harold did not jump to conclusions. He had spent his career knowing that appearances often lied. A delayed truck was not always mechanical failure. A missing shipment was not always theft. Facts came before conclusions. Always. Eliana climbed into the passenger seat, carrying her laptop. "Sorry I'm late." Harold started the engine. "No problem." She looked at him. "You seem distracted." He glanced once toward the empty curb where Nathaniel's car had been only moments before. Then he looked back at the road. "Just thinking." Outside, the rain continued to fall over downtown Columbus. Inside the Explorer, Harold quietly replayed the image of Brian handing Nathaniel that blue folder. He didn't know why. Not yet. But for the first time, his instincts told him that Eliana's birthday was becoming part of something much larger than a celebration. Harold Rogers had learned one lesson during 15 years in logistics. Nothing disappeared without leaving a trail. Freight could be rerouted. Invoices could be altered. Shipping labels could be replaced. But somewhere someone always forgot a detail. The mistake was usually small. A timestamp, a warehouse code, a delivery window that looked reasonable until someone compared it with the distance a truck would actually have to travel. That habit of noticing details had built Harold's career. He trusted patterns more than promises. 3 mornings after seeing Brian Walker hand Nathaniel Sterling the blue folder outside Hawthorne, creative Harold sat in the break room scrolling through local business news while drinking coffee. A headline from the Columbus Business Journal caught his attention. Sterling Infrastructure awarded $186 million federal highway expansion contract. The article praised Nathaniel's leadership, highlighted his charitable foundation, and included a photograph of him smiling beside state officials wearing bright orange construction helmets. Harold almost closed the article. Then one sentence stopped him. The project would begin immediately because construction materials had already reached multiple staging locations across central Ohio. Harold frowned. He knew that project. Every logistics company in the region knew it. The contract had only become public 4 days earlier. Even with unlimited resources transporting enough structural steel concrete barriers, bridge beams, and heavy equipment to multiple staging areas would normally require several weeks, not several days. He opened another browser tab, then another. Ohio Department of Transportation announcements, industry shipping bulletins, commercial freight schedules. Nothing openly contradicted the article. Still, something felt off. Harold returned to work. By lunchtime, he had forgotten about it, or at least he thought he had. That evening, as he pulled into his driveway, he noticed a large manila envelope resting against the front door. No postage, no return address, only his name. Harold Rogers. Typed, not handwritten. He looked around the quiet neighborhood. Children rode bicycles near the corner. A mail carrier had already finished the route hours earlier. Nobody appeared to be watching. He picked up the envelope and carried it inside. Eliana was still at work preparing a presentation for Sterling Infrastructure's upcoming marketing campaign. Harold opened the package carefully. Inside were photocopies. Nothing original, no note, no explanation. Just documents. Purchase orders. Freight manifests. Warehouse receipts. Transportation invoices. Several pages carried Sterling Infrastructure letterheads. Others belonged to unfamiliar companies. Harold spread everything across the dining room table. He studied the dates first, then supplier names, then shipment numbers. Within 15 minutes, his heartbeat had slowed into the focused rhythm he experienced whenever solving complicated logistics problems. He grabbed a yellow legal pad. One supplier appeared on 6 invoices. Another appeared only twice. A third company billed over $3 million in transportation costs. Harold searched the company name online. Nothing. No website, no listed office, no telephone number. That was unusual, not impossible, just unusual. He kept reading. One shipment claimed to transport steel support beams from Louisville, Kentucky to Columbus between 3:15 a.m. and 5:10 a.m. Harold quietly calculated the mileage. Even with empty highways, perfect weather, and no inspection stops, the trip required nearly 3.5 hours. The invoice allowed less than 2. Impossible. He circled it. Another delivery claimed 42 truckloads entered a temporary warehouse near Newark, Ohio. Harold recognized the warehouse immediately. He had inspected that facility 2 years earlier while negotiating a storage contract. The building physically couldn't hold 42 truckloads simultaneously. He circled that one too. Then another. Then another. By 9 o'clock, the dining room table looked like the command center of an investigation. Eliana arrived home carrying her laptop. She smiled when she saw him surrounded by paperwork. Working late? Just looking through something. She leaned over and kissed his forehead. I won't interrupt. He quickly stacked several documents together. She noticed. You've never hidden paperwork from me before. It's just work. She accepted the answer without pressing further. Instead, she walked upstairs to change clothes. Harold watched her disappear around the corner. He hated lying, even small lies. But he wasn't ready to explain documents he couldn't yet verify. The next morning, he called someone he hadn't spoken with in nearly 3 years. Daniel Brooks answered on the 3rd ring. Harold, you still recognize my number? I recognize everyone who ever beat me in college chess. Harold smiled faintly. You let me win. I absolutely did not. Daniel Brooks had been Harold's roommate at Ohio State University. While Harold studied supply chain management, Daniel majored in criminal justice before joining federal service. Today, he worked for the Office of Inspector General, specializing in procurement oversight. Their careers had moved in different directions. Their friendship had not. What can I do for you? Daniel asked. Harold hesitated. I have some documents. What kind? I don't know. That's not very helpful. I think they involve federal contracts. Daniel stopped joking. Where did they come from? They were left at my house. No sender. No. You tell anyone? No. Good. Daniel's voice became noticeably quieter. Can you meet today? I can leave work around 5. Not your office. I figured. I'll text you a location. That evening, they met at a quiet diner outside Dublin, Ohio, not downtown, not near either workplace. The restaurant looked almost forgotten. Retired couples occupied most of the booths. Nobody paid attention to 2 middle-aged men discussing paperwork over coffee. Daniel examined the copied invoices 1 page at a time. He never interrupted, never reacted, only occasionally wrote short notes in a small black notebook. 20 minutes passed. Finally, he looked up. These are interesting. Interesting good. Interesting enough that I need to ask a difficult question. Harold nodded. Have you shared these with anyone? No. Your wife? No. Keep it that way. Harold leaned back. You think they're real? I think they deserve verification. Daniel tapped one invoice with his finger. If these routing numbers are authentic, someone either fabricated transportation records. He tapped another page. Or someone billed the federal government for deliveries that could never have happened. Harold remained silent. Daniel continued. That doesn't automatically mean fraud. What else could it mean? Accounting mistakes. Clerical errors. Duplicate entries? Software problems. He paused. But several mistakes pointing in exactly the same direction become something else. Harold understood. Patterns. Again. Can you investigate? Daniel looked around the diner before answering. Officially, I don't know. Unofficially, I'll verify whether these contract numbers exist. If they do, then we'll see where they lead. Harold hesitated. They involve Sterling infrastructure. Daniel looked at him for several long seconds. The same Sterling infrastructure run by Nathaniel Sterling. Yes. Daniel closed the folder. You've just made this considerably more complicated. Outside rain tapped softly against the diner windows. Inside, neither man touched the coffee growing cold between them. Daniel finally spoke. Listen carefully. Harold nodded. If this turns into a federal investigation, everything changes. What do you mean? I mean silence. No discussing documents. No warning anyone. No confronting anyone. No trying to be a hero. Harold answered immediately. I understand. I'm serious. So am I. Daniel leaned forward. If these papers are genuine, whoever left them chose you for a reason. I've been wondering about that. Have you told anyone you were looking into Sterling infrastructure? No. Then somebody already knows who you are. The sentence settled heavily between them. Harold suddenly remembered the blue folder, Nathaniel watching people more than talking to them, the unexpected invitation, the anonymous envelope. Pieces that had seemed unrelated only days earlier now appeared to belong to the same puzzle. Daniel gathered every photocopy into a neat stack. I'll scan these tonight. When will I hear something? If there's nothing here, he shrugged. Probably never. And if there is, Daniel looked directly into Harold's eyes. You may have just stepped into the biggest procurement case I've seen in 10 years. As Harold drove home beneath the glow of interstate lights, he realized his life had quietly crossed an invisible line. He still had no proof of a crime, only questions, only impossible shipping records, only instincts sharpened by thousands of ordinary workdays. Yet somewhere behind those invoices, someone had taken a risk to place them on his doorstep. And for the first time, Harold wondered whether Nathaniel Sterling's sudden interest in Eliana was connected to something far more dangerous than an old romance. The following Monday began like every other Monday in Harold Rogers' life. His alarm sounded at 5:45 a.m. He folded his blanket before leaving the bedroom. He brewed coffee while the house remained quiet. He packed his lunch in the same insulated container he had carried for years. Routine had never bored him. It gave him room to think. When he stepped into the kitchen, Eliana was already dressed for work, scrolling through emails on her tablet while eating yogurt. You've been up early lately, she observed. So have you. She smiled tiredly. Sterling Infrastructure wants another campaign proposal before Friday. That seems fast. They move quickly. Harold nodded without commenting. He had noticed that every conversation about Nathaniel Sterling included those same words. Efficient, decisive, fast. People admired speed. Harold admired accuracy. They were rarely the same thing. As soon as he reached his office, his phone vibrated. Daniel Brooks. Harold closed his office door before answering. I verified the contract numbers. And they're legitimate. Harold leaned back in his chair. The invoices? Some are legitimate. Some aren't. What does that mean, son? It means someone mixed authentic documents with fabricated transportation records. Harold stared through the office window toward the loading yard below. Forklifts moved trailers into position. Drivers checked seals before departures. Everything outside followed strict procedures. Someone had ignored those procedures on a much larger scale. Daniel continued. I also checked the supplier companies. The one with no website. It exists. Harold frowned. So I was wrong. No. The company exists only on paper. Silence filled the line. What do you mean? It was incorporated 18 months ago. No employees. No commercial property. No equipment. No operating history. Yet, according to these invoices, it billed millions in transportation expenses. Harold slowly wrote one phrase across his legal pad. Paper company. Daniel lowered his voice. Officially, I can't tell you much more. Unofficially. There are now enough irregularities to justify opening a preliminary review. Harold exhaled quietly. What happens next? You do nothing. Harold almost laughed. You've said that twice. I'll probably say it 20 more times. I'm serious. So am I. Daniel paused. People ruin investigations because they think they should act. You don't. You observe. You document. You wait. Harold understood. Waiting had always been easier for him than for most people. After ending the call, he opened a fresh notebook. Instead of writing theories, he listed only confirmed facts. Anonymous envelope. Impossible delivery times. Paper supplier. Federal contract numbers confirmed. No assumptions. No conclusions. Just evidence. That evening, Daniel sent a single encrypted message. Need copies of everything. No originals if any appear. Harold purchased a portable scanner during his lunch break the next day. He never mentioned it to anyone. Not even Eliana. Every evening after dinner, he quietly scanned documents while Eliana answered marketing emails upstairs. He encrypted every file. He labeled them only with dates. No names, no accusations. The process became part of his nightly routine. At exactly 9 o'clock every evening, he shut the scanner off. At exactly 9:15, he locked the documents inside a small fireproof safe in the basement. At exactly 9:30, he joined Eliana in the living room as though nothing unusual had happened. The secrecy weighed on him more than he expected. Harold had never hidden important things from his wife. They had built their marriage on honesty. Now he found himself answering ordinary questions with carefully chosen words. What did you do after work? Paperwork? Anything interesting? Not really. Technically true. Emotionally dishonest. One Friday evening, Eliana noticed his distraction. They sat together on the back porch watching summer rain drift across the neighborhood. You've been somewhere else lately. Harold looked at her. What do you mean? You hear everything I say. But sometimes it feels like you're thinking about something completely different. He searched for an answer that wasn't a lie. Work has been complicated. She nodded sympathetically. I've noticed. My work too. She rested her head against his shoulder. Nate expects impossible deadlines. Harold remained silent. He keeps saying everything has to happen immediately. She laughed softly. I forgot how intense he can be. You've worked with him quite a bit this week. Almost every day. How has it been? She thought for a moment. Professional. But what? He asks a lot of personal questions. Harold turned toward her. Like what? If we're happy. If we're planning children. If we still live in the same neighborhood. She shrugged. I thought it was strange. What did you tell him? The truth. That we're happy. That we're taking life one step at a time. She smiled. He seemed disappointed. Harold felt a quiet uneasiness settle inside him. Not jealousy, concern, Nathaniel's questions had nothing to do with advertising campaigns. They sounded like someone collecting information. The following Tuesday, Lauren Mitchell invited Eliana to lunch. When Eliana returned home that evening, she seemed unusually quiet. "Everything okay?" She hesitated. "Lauren thinks you've been acting insecure." Harold blinked. "About what?" "About Nate." He almost smiled. "What made her think that?" "I don't know." "She says you're too quiet whenever his name comes up." Harold looked down at the coffee mug in his hands. "Did you agree with her?" Eliana answered immediately. "No." "But—" Another hesitation. "I wish you'd tell me what's on your mind." Harold wished the same thing, more than anything. Instead, he simply reached across the table and held her hand. "I promise you something." "What?" "If I ever believe you're in danger," she laughed. "Danger?" "I'll tell you." She squeezed his hand. "I appreciate that." Neither of them realized how close that promise would soon come to being tested. Late Wednesday afternoon, Daniel called again. His tone was different, more serious. "I need to see you." "When?" "Tonight." They met inside a quiet county park after sunset. Daniel remained inside his government-issued SUV. He handed Harold a plain folder. Inside were several photographs: warehouse loading docks, shipping containers, storage yards. "What am I looking at?" "Federal surveillance." Harold looked up. "I probably shouldn't have these." "No. You shouldn't." "So, why show me?" Daniel pointed toward one warehouse. "Recognize it?" Harold studied the image carefully. Then his eyes widened. "The Newark warehouse. The one that couldn't possibly store 42 truckloads." Daniel nodded. "It was nearly empty on the day those invoices claimed it was operating at full capacity." Harold slowly turned another page. Aerial photographs. Timestamps, vehicle counts, everything documented, everything precise. "So somebody billed for shipments that never arrived." Daniel nodded once. "That's what it's beginning to look like." Harold remained silent. Daniel watched him carefully. "You know what impresses me?" "What?" "You never once said I knew it." Harold closed the folder. "Because I didn't. I suspected. That's different." Daniel smiled faintly. "Most people confuse suspicion with proof." Harold looked out through the windshield. Darkness covered the nearly empty park. "I've spent my career proving deliveries." "Not guessing." Daniel's expression became serious again. "The investigation is expanding." "What does that mean?" "It means more agencies, more subpoenas, more financial records, and more people who might realize someone is helping us." Harold understood exactly what Daniel meant. "If anyone asks questions, you know nothing. If someone pressures you, you know nothing. If Nathaniel Sterling speaks to you—" Harold looked directly at him. "I know nothing." Daniel nodded approvingly. "Good." Before Harold stepped out of the SUV, Daniel spoke one final sentence. "We've assigned a case number." Harold stopped. "So it's official?" "Yes." "And Harold?" He looked back. "From this moment forward, assume someone is watching much more closely than you realize." Driving home beneath the glow of downtown Columbus, Harold found himself checking his rearview mirror more often than usual. Perhaps nobody followed him. Perhaps Daniel was simply being cautious. Still, when he finally pulled into his driveway, he noticed something he had never seen before. Across the street sat a black luxury sedan with its lights off. The engine quietly started the moment Harold parked. Without lingering another second, the sedan pulled away into the darkness. Harold watched its taillights disappear around the corner. He couldn't identify the driver. He couldn't read the license plate. He had no evidence that the car had anything to do with him. But deep inside, The same instinct that had uncovered impossible shipping records whispered that his quiet life was no longer as invisible as it once had been. For the next 12 days, Harold Rogers lived two completely different lives. During daylight hours, he remained exactly who everyone believed he was: a dependable logistics operations manager, a quiet husband, a man who preferred listening over speaking. Nothing about him attracted attention. He supervised freight schedules, reviewed transportation costs, solved warehouse delays, shared coffee with coworkers, drove home before sunset. The routine never changed. But after sunset, another routine quietly took shape. Every evening, Harold organized documents that officially did not exist. Every night, Daniel Brooks sent brief encrypted updates. Never more than 2 or 3 sentences. Never enough to reveal the full investigation. Only enough to let Harold know the evidence was growing. One message read, 3 additional shell companies identified. Another said financial transfers confirmed between contractors. A third simply stated, "Stay patient." Harold followed that instruction better than most people could. Patience had always been his greatest strength. Nathaniel Sterling, on the other hand, seemed incapable of slowing down. At Hawthorne Creative, his presence became almost constant. Meetings multiplied. Executives adjusted schedules whenever he appeared. Employees rushed to accommodate every request. Lauren Mitchell joked that the building should rename one of the conference rooms after him. Most people laughed. Eliana did not. One Thursday afternoon, she called Harold during his lunch break. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever think successful people become addicted to being admired?" Harold smiled. "That's an interesting question. Nate walks into every room like he's already decided everyone likes him." "And do they?" "Most of them." "What do you think?" She was quiet for several seconds. "I think he expects people to orbit around him." Harold leaned back in his chair. "Some people mistake confidence for importance." She laughed softly. "That sounds like something your grandfather would have said." "He probably did." Her laughter faded. "He's invited me to lunch tomorrow." "Business." "He says so." "Do you want to go?" "I honestly don't." "Then don't. It's not that simple." "Why not?" "He's technically our biggest client now." Harold understood. Professional obligations complicated personal boundaries. "If you're uncomfortable." "I'll figure something out." "I know you will." When the call ended, Harold resisted the temptation to ask Daniel whether Nathaniel Sterling had become aware of the investigation. The answer wouldn't change anything. Evidence first, questions later. Friday afternoon arrived with heavy summer heat. Eliana met Nathaniel at a well-known restaurant near the Scioto Mile. Harold never asked where. She volunteered the information herself that evening. It wasn't really lunch. What was it? He spent 45 minutes talking about himself. Harold smiled. And the remaining 15... He talked about us. Harold stopped drying a dinner plate. Us? He asked whether we still lived in our first house. He remembered the neighborhood. He remembered your job. He even remembered your truck. Harold slowly placed the plate into the cabinet. Interesting memory. I thought so too. She shook her head. It honestly felt like an interview. What did you tell him? The truth. She looked directly at Harold. That I'm happy. He smiled gently. And he asked whether happiness was enough. Harold didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the refrigerator and poured 2 glasses of iced tea. Finally, he said, "What did you tell him?" She accepted the glass. I said happiness lasts longer than excitement. For the first time in days, Harold laughed. That sounds exactly like you. She shrugged. I don't think he liked my answer. The following Monday brought another surprise. Harold arrived at work to find a white envelope taped beneath the windshield wiper of his Ford Explorer, No stamp, no address. Inside rested a single folded sheet of paper. Nothing else. Typed in plain black letters. He read it once, then again. Keep watching the money. The party is only the distraction. Harold folded the paper carefully. No signature. No fingerprints visible. No clue who had left it. Only another warning. He immediately drove to a public copy center before work. He scanned the note. Made 2 copies. Stored the original in the basement safe that evening. Daniel's response came only 20 minutes after receiving the scan. Don't respond to whoever sent this. We're seeing similar anonymous contacts elsewhere. That sentence raised more questions than it answered. Someone else was providing evidence. Someone inside Nathaniel Sterling's organization, or someone close enough to see what was happening. Harold realized he wasn't the only person trying to expose something. Tuesday evening, Daniel requested another meeting. This time they met inside a public library shortly before closing. People surrounded them. Students studied quietly. Parents helped children choose books. It was the safest kind of anonymity. Daniel opened his laptop. Without speaking, he turned the screen toward Harold. A complex network diagram filled the display. Boxes, lines, bank accounts, construction companies, consulting firms, transportation vendors. Harold immediately recognized Sterling infrastructure in the center. Around it stretched dozens of connected businesses, some legitimate, some suspicious, some already under investigation. Daniel pointed toward 3 highlighted companies. Those came from your documents. Harold nodded. And these? Daniel highlighted another cluster. New discoveries. Money enters through federal contracts. It exits through consulting agreements. It returns through shell vendors. Harold studied the diagram carefully. It keeps circulating. Exactly. Making the money appear legitimate. Daniel looked impressed. You understand financial layering? I understand supply chains. Money follows routes just like freight. Daniel smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. He zoomed into another section. One name immediately caught Harold's attention. Walker Strategic Consulting. He looked up. Walker. Daniel nodded. As in Brian Walker. The marketing executive. The same. Harold stared at the screen. I thought he worked only for Hawthorne Creative. He does. So, why does he own a consulting company? Excellent question. Harold felt his pulse quicken. Brian Walker. The blue folder. The secret exchange outside the building. Everything returned to that single moment in the rain. Daniel closed the laptop. We're verifying ownership records. But it doesn't look good. Harold asked quietly. Does Eliana know any of this? No. Should she? Daniel's answer came immediately. Not yet. Why? Because if she reacts differently around Brian or Nathaniel, someone might notice. Harold hated the logic, but he couldn't deny it. Wednesday evening, Eliana arrived home unusually excited. You won't believe what happened. Harold looked up from the newspaper. What? Nate announced he'll personally attend my birthday. Harold remained calm. I thought he was already coming. He is. But now he's sponsoring the entire event. She sounded confused more than impressed. He upgraded the menu. Hired live musicians, even reserved the rooftop terrace. Harold slowly folded the newspaper. Did anyone ask him to? No? Everyone keeps thanking him, but nobody actually invited him to pay for everything. She sat beside Harold. It feels strange. What kind of strange? She searched for the right words. Like the party stopped being about my birthday. What is it about now? She sighed. Him. Harold looked at her carefully. Have you told anyone that? Only you. She leaned against him. I know this sounds selfish. It doesn't. I just wanted a quiet evening with friends. Harold wrapped an arm around her shoulders. They were, and You still deserve one? She smiled sadly. I don't think that's possible anymore. Later that night, after Eliana had gone to bed, Harold stepped onto the back porch alone. Summer air drifted through the quiet neighborhood. He thought about the anonymous notes, the impossible invoices, Brian Walker's consulting company, Nathaniel's growing obsession with controlling every detail of the birthday celebration. None of it proved a connection. Not yet, but the timing no longer felt like coincidence. His phone vibrated. Another encrypted message from Daniel, search warrant approved. Tomorrow changes everything. Harold stared at the screen. Tomorrow. For federal investigators, it meant another major step. For Nathaniel Sterling, it might become the first crack in the empire he had spent years building. For Harold, it meant only one thing. He would have to become even more patient than before. Because the closer investigators moved toward the truth, the more dangerous every ordinary conversation would become. The search warrants were executed before sunrise. Harold knew nothing about the details. Daniel Brooks had made that perfectly clear. The less Harold knew, the less he could accidentally reveal. Still, he understood enough to recognize what a federal search warrant meant. Investigators had moved beyond suspicion. They now believed evidence existed in places that could disappear if they waited. At exactly 8:15 that morning, Harold's phone buzzed with a single encrypted message. Warrants completed, evidence secured, continue as normal. That was all. No explanation, no names, no results. Harold deleted the message after memorizing every word. Then he walked into another ordinary workday. Across town, life appeared equally ordinary at Hawthorne Creative. When Eliana returned home that evening, she dropped her laptop bag beside the front door with an exhausted sigh. I don't think I've ever attended so many meetings in one day. Harold looked up from preparing dinner. Everything okay? I think so. She loosened her blazer before sitting at the kitchen island. Nate seemed distracted. That caught Harold's attention. Distracted how? He kept leaving meetings to answer phone calls. He canceled lunch. He postponed 2 presentations. She frowned thoughtfully, and he looked angry. Harold stirred the pasta sauce slowly. Did he say why? No. But Brian Walker disappeared most of the afternoon, too. Harold stored that detail quietly. 2 key people, both suddenly unavailable. He changed the subject. How's the birthday planning? Eliana laughed weakly. I honestly don't recognize it anymore. What happened now? Nate hired an event production company. I never asked him to. He just did it. She opened her tablet and showed Harold several digital renderings. The rooftop venue would now include professional lighting, a string quartet, custom floral arrangements, luxury catering, large video screens, even a champagne tower. Harold studied the images. It looks expensive. Very. I wanted something simple. She sighed. Now everyone keeps calling it the social event of the summer. Harold noticed she never smiled while describing it. Instead, she looked increasingly uncomfortable. What if you told him to stop? She shook her head. He'd probably apologize. And then ignore me. That answer lingered in Harold's thoughts long after dinner. The following afternoon, Daniel requested another brief meeting. This time they met inside an underground parking garage beneath a government office building. No coffee, no conversation about ordinary life. Daniel handed Harold a sealed folder. Don't open this unless something happens to me. Harold stared at him. What? I'm serious. What is this? Insurance. Harold frowned. I don't like the sound of that. Neither do I. Daniel leaned against his car. The warrants produced far more evidence than we expected. Good. Mostly. What does that mean? Daniel looked around the nearly empty garage before continuing. It means somebody inside Sterling Infrastructure knew we were coming. Harold felt his stomach tighten. A leak. Possibly, but not early enough. We recovered most of what we needed. What was missing? Daniel hesitated. Financial servers. They'd already been wiped. Harold immediately thought of the anonymous notes. Someone inside had tried to help. Someone else had tried to destroy evidence. 2 different people. 2 different agendas. Daniel continued. We recovered backup drives. Paper contracts. Original invoices. Private accounting ledgers. He paused. And something else. What? A list. What kind of list? Names. Harold waited. Daniel slowly answered. Politicians? Consultants? Contractors? Lobbyists? Harold understood immediately. People who benefited. People who might have reasons to interfere. Is Brian Walker on it? Daniel didn't answer directly. I can't discuss names. That was answer enough. Before leaving, Daniel repeated the same warning he had given from the beginning. Don't confront anyone. I won't. Don't ask questions. I won't. And Harold? Yes. If Nathaniel suddenly becomes friendlier. Harold finished the sentence himself. Assume he wants something. Daniel smiled faintly. Exactly. Only 3 days later, that prediction proved accurate. Friday afternoon, Harold received an unexpected phone call. The display showed an unfamiliar number. He answered. Harold Rogers. Harold. The voice sounded polished, confident, controlled. Nathaniel Sterling. Harold remained perfectly calm. Mr. Sterling. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all. I've been meaning to thank you. For what? For supporting Eliana. Harold leaned back in his office chair. She's my wife. Exactly. Nathaniel laughed pleasantly. She's fortunate. The conversation felt strangely rehearsed. I've heard wonderful things about you. From whom? Oh, Nathaniel chuckled. Everyone. I don't believe that. I admire modesty. Harold said nothing. Nathaniel continued. I was thinking we should finally have lunch together. Why? A brief silence followed. To get to know each other. Harold looked out the office window. Forklifts continued loading trailers exactly on schedule. Real work. Predictable work. Unlike the conversation happening through his phone. I appreciate the invitation. But my schedule is busy. I'm sure we can find time. I'm not sure. Nathaniel laughed again. I'll have my assistant contact you. Before Harold could politely decline once more, the call ended. He immediately documented every detail, time, duration, exact wording. Then he encrypted the note and forwarded it to Daniel. The reply came within minutes. Do not meet him alone. That evening, Harold told Eliana about the invitation. Her reaction surprised him. He called you? Yes. He never mentioned it. She looked genuinely puzzled. That's unusual. What is? Nate usually tells everyone what he's planning. Harold considered that. So why keep this quiet? She slowly shook her head. I don't know. Saturday afternoon brought another uncomfortable surprise. Lauren Mitchell stopped by the house unexpectedly. She carried a garment bag. I need Eliana to try on her birthday dress. The women disappeared upstairs. Harold remained in the living room reading. Their conversation drifted faintly through the hallway. He wasn't trying to listen. Certain sentences simply carried farther than others. You know Nate still loves you, Lauren's voice. A pause. Then Eliana answered. That's not my responsibility. Another pause. He says Harold doesn't understand your potential. Silence. Finally, Eliana spoke again. Harold has never tried to change me. Her voice remained calm. He believes in me without making me prove anything. Lauren didn't immediately respond. When the women returned downstairs 20 minutes later, both acted perfectly normal. But Harold noticed Eliana's smile had faded. After Lauren left, he asked quietly, "Everything okay?" She hesitated. Lauren thinks I settled. "For me?" She nodded. Harold looked toward the window. "I've heard that before." "It doesn't bother you." "It used to." "What about now?" He smiled gently. "I have stopped measuring my life using someone else's ruler." Eliana walked across the room and wrapped her arms around him. "I wish more people understood you." Harold held her quietly. "They don't have to." Later that evening, while Eliana watched television, Harold stepped into the basement to organize documents. He opened the fireproof safe, invoices, anonymous notes, encrypted backups. The sealed folder Daniel had instructed him never to open. Everything remained exactly where he had left it. His phone vibrated again. Another encrypted message. Different wording this time. "Witness interviews begin Monday." That sentence stayed in his mind long after he locked the safe. Witnesses. Soon investigators would begin asking questions. People would become nervous. Stories would change. All carefully maintained appearances would begin to crack. For the first time since the investigation started, Harold realized the danger was no longer limited to hidden paperwork and anonymous envelopes. Soon, ordinary conversations themselves would become evidence. And somewhere inside Sterling infrastructure, someone who had already erased servers and hidden financial records would almost certainly realize that time was running out. The first witness interviews began on Monday morning. Harold learned that fact from another encrypted message that contained only 4 words. Interviews have officially started. Nothing more. No names, no locations, no results. He slipped his phone back into his pocket and focused on the freight schedule spread across his desk. A delayed shipment from Cincinnati needed rerouting. A refrigerated trailer required immediate maintenance. One of his supervisors requested approval for overtime. Ordinary responsibilities grounded him. He appreciated that. While federal investigators questioned executives and accountants across Ohio, Harold continued solving problems measured in delivery times and warehouse inventory. He preferred that balance. It reminded him that the world still functioned normally outside the investigation. By Wednesday afternoon, however, normality began to crack. Eliana arrived home nearly an hour earlier than usual. She looked exhausted, more emotionally than physically. Harold met her in the hallway. "What happened?" She removed her shoes slowly before answering. 3 people resigned today. "At Hawthorne?" She nodded. "Accounting. Procurement. And legal. All in one afternoon." Harold remained careful. "Did they say why?" "No. But everyone knows something is happening." She walked into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. "Nobody will say it out loud. But people keep whispering." She leaned against the counter. "Brian Walker spent half the day inside conference rooms with outside attorneys." Harold stored another detail away. "What about Nathaniel?" "He wasn't there. He canceled every meeting." She frowned. "That's the 2nd time this month." Harold kept his voice neutral. "Maybe he's traveling." "Maybe." She didn't sound convinced. Dinner that evening was quieter than usual. Eliana picked at her food. Twice Harold caught her staring absently through the dining room window. Finally, she asked, "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "If your company suddenly lost several executives, what would you think?" Harold considered his answer. "I'd wait for facts." She smiled faintly. "That's the most Harold answer imaginable." He laughed softly. "You married me anyway." "I did." She reached across the table. "And I would again." Those simple words stayed with him long after dinner ended. Later that night, another encrypted message arrived from Daniel. "No contact unless necessary." Harold understood immediately. Something significant had happened. The next morning confirmed it. News outlets began reporting that federal investigators had executed search warrants at several transportation vendors connected to government infrastructure contracts. No company names appeared. No executives were identified. The articles described the investigation only as a routine procurement review. Most readers probably ignored the story. Harold did not. Neither apparently did Nathaniel Sterling. That afternoon, Eliana called unexpectedly. "You won't believe this." "What happened?" "Nate wants to move my birthday party." Harold frowned. "Move it where?" "He reserved the rooftop ballroom at the Riverside Grand Hotel." "I thought the original venue was already booked." "It was." "So, why change it?" "He said the first location wasn't prestigious enough." Harold heard frustration in her voice. "I told him I liked the first venue. And—" He smiled. "Then changed the reservation anyway." Harold leaned back in his office chair. "How do you feel about that?" "Honestly, I feel like I'm becoming a guest at my own birthday." That sentence stayed with him, because it sounded true. Nathaniel wasn't planning a celebration. He was directing a performance. Friday evening, Lauren Mitchell invited Eliana out for coffee. Harold stayed home. Around 9:30, Eliana returned, looking unusually thoughtful. "Lauren thinks I should forgive Nate." Harold looked up from the book he had been reading. "For what?" "For how their relationship ended years ago?" "I thought you already had." "I did. So why bring it up now?" Eliana sat beside him. "Because she says people deserve second chances." Harold closed his book carefully. "I agree." She looked surprised. "You do?" "Yes. But second chances don't require returning to old relationships." She smiled. "I knew there was a catch." "No catch. Just experience." She rested her head against his shoulder. "Sometimes I wonder why everyone else keeps talking about Nate. I barely think about him." Harold gently squeezed her hand. "Some people can't let go of the past." She nodded slowly. "I guess." What neither of them realized was that Nathaniel Sterling had no intention of letting the past remain in the past. Saturday afternoon, Harold stopped by a neighborhood florist. The owner, Mrs. Alvarez, recognized him immediately. "Back again?" "I am." "The same flowers?" He smiled. "Yes." She walked toward the refrigerated display. "I've already ordered fresh white lilies for next month." Harold looked surprised. "You remembered?" "You've bought the same flowers for your wife's birthday every year." She laughed. "I'd probably notice if you changed." Harold smiled warmly. "They're her favorite." Mrs. Alvarez began trimming several stems. "Most husbands buy roses." "Why lilies?" Harold watched her work. "Because on our second date, Eliana told me roses were beautiful, but lilies looked honest." The florist smiled. "I've never forgotten that." Neither had Harold. He paid in advance and arranged to collect the bouquet on the morning of the party. As he walked back toward his Explorer, his phone vibrated. Daniel. Harold answered immediately. "I have about 2 minutes." "That's enough." Daniel's voice sounded more strained than usual. "We've identified another witness. Someone important." "Very. Inside Sterling Infrastructure." "Yes." Harold remained silent. Daniel continued. "They've agreed to cooperate." "Voluntarily?" "Yes." "What changed?" Daniel hesitated. "They're afraid." "Of Nathaniel?" "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Another pause followed. "We're moving faster now." "How fast?" "Days." "Not weeks?" Harold absorbed that quietly. Daniel lowered his voice. "And Harold?" "Yes." "If anyone unexpectedly contacts you?" "Especially Nathaniel." "Tell me immediately." "I will." The call ended. Sunday morning brought bright sunshine across Columbus. Harold and Eliana attended church together as they usually did. Afterward, they walked slowly through Franklin Park. Families filled the sidewalks. Children laughed near the fountains. Everything felt peaceful. For a little while, Harold almost forgot about investigations, shell companies, and encrypted messages. Eliana slipped her hand into his. "I'm looking forward to next weekend." "Your birthday?" She nodded. "I know it's become much bigger than I wanted. But at least we'll be together?" Harold smiled gently. "We always are." She leaned against him while they watched a wedding party taking photographs beneath blooming trees. "You know, I don't really care about expensive gifts. I never thought you did. I'd rather spend an evening with you." He looked at her. "You will?" She smiled. "I hope so." Late that evening, Harold opened the basement safe once more. Everything remained organized exactly as before. Anonymous letters, digital backups, financial copies. Daniel's sealed emergency folder. He locked the safe and turned off the basement light. Before climbing the stairs, his phone vibrated one final time. Another encrypted message. It contained only one sentence. "Sterling has scheduled a private meeting with multiple executives tomorrow morning." No explanation followed. Harold stared at the message for several seconds before deleting it. His instincts immediately told him the timing mattered. Witness interviews had begun. Search warrants had already been executed. A new cooperating insider had come forward. Now Nathaniel Sterling was suddenly gathering his closest executives behind closed doors. Whether it was damage control, loyalty testing, or preparation for something much larger, Harold couldn't know. Not yet. But every piece of evidence, every strange conversation, and every unexpected decision seemed to be moving toward the same destination. And with Eliana's birthday now only 1 week away, Harold could no longer shake the feeling that Nathaniel wasn't simply planning an extravagant celebration. He was preparing a public spectacle that would change far more than a birthday party. The week of Eliana's birthday arrived with an unusual silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that settled over people who sensed change without understanding its direction. At Hawthorne, creative conversation stopped whenever managers walked into the room. Employees lowered their voices. Conference room doors remained closed longer than usual. No official announcements had been made. Yet everyone seemed to know something was coming. Eliana noticed it immediately. On Tuesday evening, she sat across from Harold on the back patio while the summer sun disappeared behind the trees. "I've never seen an office behave like this." Harold sipped his iced tea. "What do you mean?" "People smile. But they don't relax. They laugh. But they keep checking their phones." She looked down at the condensation on her glass. "It's like everyone is waiting for permission to panic." Harold listened quietly. "What about Brian Walker?" "He barely leaves his office." "And Nate?" She hesitated. "He suddenly became incredibly generous." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Generous?" "He announced bonuses. He donated equipment to 3 charities. He promised scholarships." She looked puzzled. "It all happened within 2 days." Harold said nothing. His instinct immediately recognized the pattern. People who expected public scrutiny often tried to strengthen their public image beforehand. He had seen smaller versions of it throughout his logistics career. Executives who ignored safety inspections suddenly organized charity drives. Managers who mistreated employees suddenly bought lunch for entire departments before annual reviews. The scale was different. The behavior wasn't. Wednesday afternoon, Daniel sent another encrypted message. Public image campaign accelerating. Harold almost smiled. He and Daniel had reached the same conclusion independently. That evening, Eliana spread the final birthday schedule across the dining room table. Harold studied it carefully. The event had become astonishingly elaborate. Guests would arrive by private elevator. A live jazz ensemble would perform during dinner. Professional photographers would document the evening. A luxury dessert station had replaced the original birthday cake. There would even be a short presentation before dinner. Harold looked up. A presentation? Eliana sighed. I didn't ask for that either. Who organized it? Nate. What is it supposed to be? He says it's a celebration of my career. Harold noticed she didn't sound excited. She sounded trapped. Can you cancel it? I've tried. And? He keeps saying everything is already arranged. She folded the printed schedule. I don't think he hears the word no. Harold gently reached across the table. You don't owe anyone a performance. I know. But now dozens of people are coming. I don't want to ruin everyone's evening. Harold smiled softly. You won't? She looked at him with tired eyes. I hope you're right. Thursday morning brought another surprise. Harold arrived at work to find Brian Walker waiting outside the logistics building. Brian smiled as Harold parked. Harold? Harold stepped out of the Explorer. Brian. What brings you here? Brian adjusted his expensive navy jacket. I was nearby. I thought I'd finally introduce myself properly. Harold shook his hand politely. I thought we'd already met. We have. But only briefly. Brian smiled easily. I've heard wonderful things about you. Harold recognized the same polished confidence Nathaniel carried. Different personality. Same careful control. What can I do for you? Brian glanced toward the warehouse. I wanted to thank you. For what? For supporting Eliana. Harold remained expressionless. She deserves support. Absolutely. Brian nodded enthusiastically. She's incredibly talented. I agree. An awkward silence followed. Finally, Brian spoke again. Nate talks about her constantly. Harold simply nodded. He's always admired her potential. I imagine he has. Brian watched Harold carefully, almost as though searching for irritation. He found none. You don't seem bothered. About what? That Nate never stopped caring, Harold answered calmly. My marriage isn't measured by someone else's feelings. For the first time, Brian's confident smile weakened. I suppose that's one way to look at it. It's the only one that matters. Brian recovered quickly. Well, I'll see you Saturday. My understanding is everyone important will be there. Harold smiled politely. I'll be there for my wife. Brian walked back toward his luxury sedan without another word. As soon as he disappeared, Harold documented the conversation in his encrypted notes. Every unexpected contact mattered now, especially those initiated by people connected to Nathaniel. Friday evening, Daniel called instead of texting. His voice sounded unusually serious. We've confirmed something. What? The cooperating witness gave us internal emails. Harold listened carefully. They discussed the birthday. He frowned. My wife's birthday. Yes. Harold's heartbeat slowed instead of quickening. He had learned that calm thinking mattered most when surprises appeared. What do the emails say? I can't quote them. But they described the event as... Daniel paused. An opportunity. For what? Image rehabilitation. Harold closed his eyes briefly. He had suspected something similar. Now investigators had evidence suggesting it. So the party was never about Eliana. No. It appears to be about Nathaniel. Harold asked one final question. Does Eliana know? No. And don't tell her. I won't. Saturday morning finally arrived. The day before the birthday. Harold and Eliana spent the morning running ordinary errands. A grocery store, a pharmacy, a neighborhood bakery. For several hours, life felt completely normal. No investigators, no billionaires, no secret evidence. Just a married couple buying groceries together. On the drive home, Eliana suddenly laughed. What? I just realized something. What? We've spent almost every birthday together. Harold smiled. I've never missed one. Even when we were broke. He laughed. I remember eating birthday cake from paper plates. And decorating the apartment with dollar store balloons. She smiled warmly. I think those were my favorite birthdays. So do I. She reached across the center console and squeezed his hand. I've never needed expensive things. I know. I only wanted consistency. Harold looked at her briefly before returning his eyes to the road. I can promise you that. Late that afternoon, the florist called. Mrs. Alvarez, your lilies are ready. I'll pick them up tomorrow morning. They're beautiful this year. They always are. After hanging up, Harold walked downstairs once more. He opened the safe. Every document remained untouched. He checked the sealed folder Daniel had entrusted to him, still unopened. Exactly as instructed. Then he locked everything away. As he climbed the stairs, another encrypted notification appeared. Final confirmation. Tomorrow's party will include individuals already under federal observation. Harold read the sentence twice. That changed everything. Not because investigators intended to intervene. Daniel had never suggested that. But because it meant the guest list itself had become significant. Executives, consultants, business partners. People whose names had already surfaced inside financial records. People gathering voluntarily in one place. Harold deleted the message. Then he walked into the living room. Eliana sat on the sofa, reviewing birthday messages already arriving from friends. She looked up and smiled. Can you believe I'm another year older tomorrow? Harold smiled back. I can, she laughed. Do I look older? No. I think you look exactly like the woman who still prefers white lilies over roses. Her smile softened immediately. You remembered. I always will. She crossed the room and hugged him tightly. For several quiet seconds, neither of them spoke. Harold wished he could freeze that moment forever, because he knew tomorrow would not simply be another birthday. It would be the first time Nathaniel Sterling gathered everyone he wanted to impress into one room. And somewhere behind the elegant decorations, expensive music-polished speeches and dazzling lights, invisible threads were tightening around people who still believed they controlled the story. Harold understood something no one else at that party yet realized. By this time tomorrow evening, appearances would matter more than ever, but evidence would matter most. Sunday morning arrived clear and warm. Harold woke before sunrise. For several quiet minutes, he remained lying beside Eliana, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. She looked peaceful, untouched by the invisible pressure gathering around her birthday. He wished the day could remain that way. Eventually, he slipped out of bed and drove across Columbus while the streets were still nearly empty. Mrs. Alvarez was already arranging fresh flowers when he entered the florist shop. She smiled immediately. I knew you'd be early. I always am. She disappeared into the refrigerated room before returning with a carefully wrapped bouquet of white lilies. They were flawless. Fresh green stems, bright white petals, a faint natural fragrance that filled the shop without overwhelming it. Mrs. Alvarez handed them to Harold carefully. I saved the best ones. They're beautiful. They always remind me of your wife. Harold smiled. They remind me of our beginning. She tilted her head. You've told me that before. I never get tired of hearing it. Harold accepted the bouquet. Neither do I. As he turned toward the door, she stopped him. Whatever happens today? He looked back. Don't let anyone convince you simple things have less value. Harold smiled warmly. I won't. Outside, the early sunlight reflected softly across the white petals. He placed the flowers carefully inside his Explorer before driving home. When he walked through the front door, Eliana was already awake. She wore a simple cream-colored sweater and jeans. No makeup, no expensive jewelry. Just the woman Harold had fallen in love with years earlier. Her face lit up immediately when she saw the lilies. "You remembered?" "I always will." She stepped forward and buried her face gently in the flowers. "They smell perfect." He kissed her forehead. "Happy birthday." For a few minutes, nothing else existed. No billionaire, no investigation, no secrets. They shared coffee on the back porch, while morning birds filled the neighborhood with song. "I wish today could stay like this." Eliana smiled. "So do I." Harold looked toward the quiet street. "It still can." She laughed softly. "Not after Nate's production schedule." Harold couldn't disagree. By late morning, birthday messages arrived continuously. Former classmates, co-workers, family members, old neighbors, even clients sent flowers and gifts. Around noon, a delivery truck stopped outside. 2 employees carried an enormous arrangement of rare orchids into the house. Attached to it was a handwritten card. "Happy birthday to the woman who always deserved the world." Nathaniel Eliana sighed. "It's too much." Harold helped move the arrangement into the dining room. "What do you want to do with it?" "I can't throw it away." "You don't have to." "But I don't want it in the living room either." They eventually placed it in the guest room. Not hidden, not displayed. Exactly where Eliana seemed comfortable leaving it. At 2:00, another delivery arrived. This time it was a velvet jewelry case. Inside rested a diamond necklace so brilliant it reflected light across the room. Harold silently read the accompanying card. "A birthday worthy of unforgettable memories." Nate Eliana stared at the necklace for several seconds. "I can't wear this." "You don't have to." "It probably costs more than my car." Harold smiled. "So does his watch." She laughed despite herself. Then she closed the case firmly. "I'm not wearing it." Instead, she walked upstairs and returned wearing the small silver necklace Harold had given her on their first wedding anniversary. It was simple, elegant, worth very little financially, worth everything emotionally. Harold noticed immediately. "You kept it." "I've never stopped wearing it." She touched the tiny silver pendant. "This reminds me who I am." Harold smiled quietly. 3 hours later, they prepared to leave. Eliana changed into a deep emerald evening dress that reflected her eyes beautifully. Harold adjusted his familiar navy suit. Nothing expensive. Nothing designed to impress strangers. Only clean, carefully pressed clothing. Before leaving, Harold checked the basement safe one final time. Locked, secure, untouched. His phone vibrated. One final encrypted message: maintain normal behavior. That was all. No greeting, no signature, no explanation. Harold deleted it immediately. The drive toward downtown Columbus passed mostly in silence. Not uncomfortable silence. Thoughtful silence. As the city skyline appeared ahead, Eliana finally spoke. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If tonight becomes awkward..." Harold glanced toward her. "What do you mean? I don't know." "I just have a strange feeling." She looked through the passenger window. "Promise me something." "What?" "If people compare you to Nate..." "Don't let it ruin your evening." Harold smiled gently. "It won't." She looked unconvinced. "They always compare people. Wealth, cars, jobs, everything." Harold kept his eyes on the road. "I stopped competing years ago." "Why?" "Because I realized I wasn't running the same race." She reached across and squeezed his hand. "Thank you." "For what?" "For never making me choose." Harold understood exactly what she meant. Nathaniel constantly asked people to choose. Loyalty, status, opportunity, influence. Harold never had. As they approached the Riverside Grand Hotel, luxury vehicles filled the entrance. Valets hurried between expensive cars. Guests wearing designer clothing gathered beneath the elegant glass canopy. Professional photographers waited near the entrance. Large floral displays framed the lobby. Everything looked less like a birthday, more like a corporate gala. A valet approached Harold's aging explorer. His polite smile faltered for only a fraction of a second before returning. "Good evening." Harold handed over the keys without embarrassment. The young man accepted them professionally. "Enjoy your evening." Inside the hotel, another surprise awaited. Large digital displays welcomed guests. "Happy birthday, Eliana Rogers," sponsored by Sterling Infrastructure Holdings. Eliana stopped walking. "I never approved this." Harold looked at the enormous screens. "I know." Her shoulders tightened slightly. "This doesn't even feel personal anymore." A hotel coordinator approached. "Mrs. Rogers." "Yes." "We're ready whenever you are." She looked confused. "Ready for what?" "The opening reception." "I didn't know there was one." The coordinator hesitated. "It was added yesterday." Eliana exchanged a brief glance with Harold. Neither said anything. They followed the coordinator toward the private elevators. As the doors opened, Harold immediately recognized several faces: state transportation officials, construction executives, corporate attorneys, consultants. Some matched descriptions Daniel had quietly mentioned over previous months. Others Harold recognized only from newspaper articles about government infrastructure projects. Nathaniel hadn't invited friends. He had assembled influence. The elevator rose silently toward the rooftop ballroom. No one spoke. Soft, instrumental music drifted downward from hidden speakers. When the doors opened again, an elegant reception area stretched before them. Crystal chandeliers, fresh flowers, professional lighting, a string quartet performing beside panoramic windows overlooking downtown Columbus. Waiters circulated with silver trays. Everything appeared flawless, except for one detail. Near the center of the ballroom stood an elevated presentation platform surrounded by television-quality cameras, far larger than necessary for an ordinary birthday speech. Harold noticed it immediately. So did Eliana. She leaned toward him and whispered, "I've never seen those cameras before." Before Harold could answer, a familiar voice echoed warmly across the ballroom. "There they are." Nathaniel Sterling walked confidently through the crowd wearing a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. Guests instinctively turned toward him. Conversation stopped. Smiles widened. He opened his arms as though greeting honored guests. But Harold noticed something different. Nathaniel wasn't looking at the ballroom. He wasn't looking at the executives. He wasn't even looking at the cameras. Every step carried him directly toward Eliana. And in his right hand, partially concealed behind his jacket, Harold caught the unmistakable glimpse of a small, black velvet box. Harold waited until Lauren excused herself before slipping one hand into his jacket pocket. The ballroom continued moving around him. The string quartet resumed playing soft jazz. Servers circulated with crystal glasses balanced effortlessly on silver trays. Guests gradually returned to polite conversations, though every discussion seemed to orbit the proposal that had just failed. Harold glanced discreetly at his phone. One encrypted message waited. Meeting moved. Private conference suite. North corridor. 5 minutes. Daniel Harold immediately deleted the notification. He looked toward Eliana. She stood beside 2 co-workers who were quietly reassuring her that she had handled the situation with grace. For the first time all evening, she appeared to be breathing normally again. Harold walked over. "I'm going to get some fresh air." She nodded. "I'll stay here." "You okay?" She smiled faintly. "Better now." He gently squeezed her hand. "I'll be right back." Without another word, he walked toward the hallway where Nathaniel had disappeared only moments earlier. The elegant music gradually faded behind him. The north corridor felt entirely different from the ballroom. Quiet, professional, almost clinical. Several conference rooms lined both sides of the hallway. Their heavy wooden doors remained closed. Hotel employees moved efficiently without drawing attention. Harold slowed naturally instead of rushing. Daniel had taught him months earlier that calm people attracted less attention than hurried ones. As he reached the final conference suite, a hotel maintenance worker stepped out carrying a toolbox. The man never looked directly at Harold. Instead, he quietly said, "Room 12." Then he continued walking. Harold immediately recognized Daniel's method. The maintenance worker was one of the investigation team's plainclothes officers. Harold entered room 12. Daniel Brooks stood beside a large conference table covered with architectural drawings. Two additional investigators worked quietly over laptops. All wore ordinary business suits. No badges were visible. Daniel closed the door. "You made it. What happened?" Daniel didn't waste time. 38 minutes ago, federal magistrates approved the final seizure warrants. Harold absorbed the information silently. "So, it's happening." "Yes." "When?" Daniel looked directly at him. "Tonight." Harold remained perfectly still. He had expected action eventually. He simply hadn't expected it during Eliana's birthday. Daniel unfolded several printed documents across the table. Corporate ownership charts, financial transfers, warehouse lease agreements, shell company registrations. Red arrows connected dozens of entities together. The network looked far larger than Harold had imagined. Daniel pointed toward one familiar name. Walker Strategic Consulting. Harold nodded. "I've seen it. It doesn't actually provide consulting. It launders procurement payments." Another investigator highlighted several bank transfers. These moved through 4 states within 48 hours. Daniel continued. The money eventually financed luxury property purchases. Harold studied the diagram. Sterling infrastructure. Daniel nodded once. Central control. Harold slowly exhaled. Months of suspicion now existed as organized evidence. Daniel looked toward another investigator. A laptop screen rotated toward Harold. Surveillance photographs appeared. Nathaniel meeting state contractors. Brian Walker carrying document boxes between offices. Executives entering warehouses after midnight. Several photographs included timestamps. Everything had been carefully documented. Harold asked quietly, "What do you need from me?" Daniel hesitated. "Nothing operational. You've already done enough." Harold frowned slightly. "Then why am I here?" Daniel opened a sealed evidence envelope. Inside rested copies of handwritten meeting notes. They came from an internal witness. Harold recognized the handwriting immediately. Brian Walker. Daniel pointed toward one sentence. Birthday event, media presence, proposal, image recovery before compliance action. Harold read it twice, then a third time. So the proposal was never personal, Daniel answered calmly. I think Nathaniel convinced himself it was. But strategically, the event had another purpose. Public sympathy. Exactly. Harold looked back toward the ballroom through the closed conference room door, as though he could somehow see through it. Eliana had unknowingly become part of a corporate strategy. Not because Nathaniel loved her, because he needed an audience. Daniel interrupted his thoughts. We've confirmed something else. What? The press wasn't invited accidentally. Harold looked back. The cameras. Daniel nodded. 3 media organizations. 1 lifestyle magazine. 1 business publication. And 1 financial news network. Harold understood immediately. Nathaniel had intended tomorrow's headlines. Billionaire wins back former love. Corporate leader demonstrates humility, perfect public relations. Instead, the proposal had collapsed before every camera. One investigator quietly entered, carrying another folder. Vehicle movement confirmed. Daniel accepted it. He read quickly before looking up. Nathaniel's attorneys just ordered secure document transport. Harold recognized the implication. They know something. They suspect something, Daniel corrected gently. We don't know how much. A phone vibrated somewhere in the room. One investigator answered briefly before hanging up. They're leaving the ballroom. Daniel checked his watch. Faster than expected. Harold asked, What happens now? Daniel carefully gathered the documents. Federal agents are already moving. They'll execute multiple warrants simultaneously. Warehouses. Corporate offices. Accounting firms. Storage facilities. Harold remained silent. No dramatic speeches. No television raids. Simply coordinated legal procedure. Months of preparation unfolding according to schedule. Daniel stepped closer. I need you to promise me something. What? When everything begins? Stay with Eliana. Harold nodded. I plan to. No matter what happens. No matter what people say. No matter who calls. Harold understood. The investigation belonged to federal authorities now. His responsibility belonged to his wife. Daniel extended his hand. Harold shook it firmly. You helped more people than you know. I only followed documents. Daniel smiled. Most people stopped looking. Harold left the conference room quietly. The hallway seemed busier now. Several attorneys hurried toward elevators carrying briefcases. Hotel security officers whispered into radios. Something beneath the surface had clearly begun shifting. As he approached the ballroom entrance, Harold noticed Brian Walker standing alone beside a window. Brian appeared unusually tense. His phone remained pressed against his ear. No. I don't care what they said. Move everything. His voice dropped lower. No. Immediately. He ended the call abruptly. When he turned, he found Harold standing only a few feet away. For one brief second, neither man spoke. Brian forced an artificial smile. Enjoying the party, Harold answered calmly. My wife is. Brian laughed nervously. That's good. You seem busy. Business never sleeps. Harold noticed tiny beads of perspiration forming near Brian's temple, despite the cool air conditioning. You look worried. Brian's smile weakened. Just a difficult client. Harold nodded politely. I hope everything works out. Without waiting for another response, he continued walking. Behind him, he heard Brian dialing another number almost immediately. Harold re-entered the ballroom. The atmosphere had changed again. Guests continued smiling. Music continued playing. Champagne continued flowing. Yet subtle differences had appeared. Several executives were quietly leaving. Phones appeared constantly. Small groups formed in distant corners. Whispers replaced laughter. Nathaniel stood near the panoramic windows speaking with two attorneys. His expression remained composed. But Harold now recognized the signs Daniel had spent months teaching him. Nathaniel's shoulders were slightly tighter. His smile no longer reached his eyes. Every 30 seconds he checked his phone. He wasn't enjoying the evening anymore. He was waiting. Harold crossed the ballroom toward Eliana. She looked relieved to see him. There you are. I'm sorry. I got delayed. She studied his face. Everything okay? Harold smiled gently. Yes. She searched his eyes for several seconds. She had always been remarkably good at sensing when something weighed on him. You look different. Different how? Calmer. He almost laughed. I suppose I am. She linked her arm through his. I've decided something. What? I don't want to remember today because of the proposal. I want to remember it because you're here. Harold smiled. I like that plan. She leaned her head briefly against his shoulder. Across the ballroom, Nathaniel suddenly looked down at his phone once more. This time, whatever appeared on the screen erased every remaining trace of confidence from his face. He immediately turned toward his attorneys. Then, without another word to his guests, he hurried toward the ballroom exit. Harold watched Nathaniel disappear through the ballroom doors without creating a scene. Almost no one else seemed to notice. Most guests remained occupied with polite conversation, elegant desserts, and careful attempts to pretend the failed proposal had never happened. Only those who had been standing closest to the stage understood something deeper had shifted. Eliana quietly set her untouched champagne glass onto a nearby table. I think I'm ready to go home. Harold looked at her gently. We can leave whenever you want. Before either of them could take another step, Lauren Mitchell hurried back across the ballroom. She lowered her voice. Please don't leave yet. Eliana looked puzzled. Why? I don't know exactly what's happening. Lauren glanced towards the ballroom entrance. But half the executive team has suddenly disappeared. Harold remained silent. Lauren continued. Our chief financial officer left without saying goodbye. So did outside counsel. Brian Walker practically ran out. Eliana frowned. That's strange. Lauren nodded. Nobody leaves Nate's events early. Another employee joined them. Rachel Collins looked equally confused. My phone won't stop ringing. Everyone from headquarters is asking where Brian is. Lauren exchanged another uneasy look with Rachel. Neither woman understood the investigation unfolding beneath the surface. They only sensed something unusual. Harold spoke calmly. Maybe there's a business emergency. Rachel sighed. On a Sunday night? No. This feels different. Across the ballroom, the musicians continued performing. The melody remained elegant. Yet more empty seats appeared every few minutes. Waiters whispered among themselves. Hotel staff checked their radios more frequently. The atmosphere of celebration slowly dissolved into uncertainty. Eliana quietly touched Harold's arm. Can we walk outside for a minute? Of course. They stepped onto the rooftop terrace overlooking downtown Columbus. Warm summer air replaced the cool ballroom. The city lights stretched across the skyline. Traffic flowed peacefully several stories below. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Eliana broke the silence. I'm embarrassed. Harold looked at her. You shouldn't be. Everyone watched that happen. You didn't ask for it. She leaned against the stone railing. I keep replaying it. The cameras, the proposal, the silence. Harold stood beside her. You handled it with honesty. I heard him. You told the truth. They aren't always the same thing. Harold considered her words carefully. No, they aren't. She looked towards the distant skyline. I never wanted revenge. I never wanted Nate to fail. I only wanted my own life. Harold quietly admired how naturally compassion remained part of her character. Even after being publicly placed in an impossible situation, she still worried about someone else's feelings. He remembered something Daniel had once said. Character usually became clearest under pressure. Tonight, Eliana had revealed hers. She suddenly turned toward Harold. Can I ask something? Anything. Were you angry? When? When he knelt in front of me. Harold answered honestly. No. She looked surprised. Not even a little? I was concerned. For you. Not for my pride. She searched his face. I don't understand. Harold smiled faintly. I knew you already had the answer. You did. I trusted you. Those 3 words seemed to affect her more deeply than any dramatic declaration could have. I don't think I've thanked you enough. You don't need to. I do. She stepped closer. Most husbands would have exploded. Most husbands aren't me. A small laugh escaped her. No. They aren't. She gently rested her head against his shoulder. I almost forgot what today was supposed to be. Harold smiled. It was your birthday. She laughed softly. It still is. He reached into his jacket pocket. I almost forgot something too. She looked curious. What? He removed a small wrapped box. Simple brown paper. No expensive ribbon. No designer logo. She stared at it. You brought me another gift. I planned to give it to you at dinner. Her eyes softened immediately. She accepted the package carefully. Inside rested a small wooden frame. Within it sat an old photograph. Their first apartment, the tiny balcony, 2 folding chairs, a borrowed coffee table, and the 2 of them smiling at the camera while holding paintbrushes after repainting the living room together. She covered her mouth. You kept this. I found it last month. She slowly traced the edge of the frame. I loved that apartment. So did I. It was tiny. It leaked every winter. The heater barely worked. And we were happy. Harold nodded. We were. A tear slowly escaped down her cheek. I've been chasing promotions for so many years. I forgot how simple life used to feel. Harold gently wiped away the tear. You never forgot. You just became busy. She looked at him with quiet gratitude. This means more than every expensive thing I've received today. Harold smiled. I hoped it would. Behind them, the ballroom doors suddenly opened. Lauren stepped outside. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. She hesitated. But I think you should both come inside. What happened? Lauren looked genuinely shaken. Televisions. They just turned on. Harold exchanged a brief glance with Eliana. All 3 quickly returned inside. The ballroom no longer resembled a celebration. Music had stopped completely. Guests stood clustered around several large television screens mounted throughout the room. The screens displayed breaking local news. No sound played initially, only urgent headlines scrolling across the bottom. Federal authorities execute multiple search warrants across Columbus. Several guests instinctively reached for their phones. Hotel employees quietly increased the television volume. A news anchor appeared. Developing tonight. Boards. Federal investigators have confirmed coordinated searches involving multiple commercial properties connected to public infrastructure contracts. Images flashed across the screen. Warehouse entrances, federal vehicles, evidence teams, agents carrying sealed document boxes. Harold recognized one warehouse immediately. The abandoned Riverside facility Daniel had shown him months earlier. Gasps spread throughout the ballroom. Someone whispered, "That's Sterling Infrastructure." Another guest answered, "It can't be." The television switched to live helicopter footage. Several FBI vehicles stood outside a downtown office building. Reporters gathered behind police barriers. The anchor continued. Authorities have not yet announced formal charges. However, sources indicate financial records and procurement documents are being seized. The camera briefly focused on the company logo displayed above the entrance. Sterling Infrastructure Holdings. The ballroom fell completely silent. Lauren slowly looked toward Rachel. Rachel looked toward the empty space where Nathaniel had been standing only minutes earlier. "He knew," Lauren whispered. "He left before the news." Across the room, executives began leaving as quickly as possible. Some avoided eye contact. Others spoke urgently into their phones. Several abandoned untouched dinners on their tables. The birthday celebration collapsed almost instantly. Eliana stood motionless beside Harold. She looked at the television, then toward the hallway where Nathaniel had disappeared. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. So that's why everything changed. Harold didn't answer. He simply watched the screen. The news anchor suddenly received another update through an earpiece. Her expression changed. She looked directly into the camera. We have just received confirmation that federal investigators are also seeking several senior executives connected to the company for questioning. Before she could continue, Harold noticed movement near the ballroom entrance. The elevator doors opened. Daniel Brooks stepped quietly into the lobby outside the ballroom with 2 federal agents beside him. He wasn't looking at Harold. He wasn't looking at the guests. His eyes were fixed on the corridor ahead, as though he knew exactly where Nathaniel Sterling was heading next. Daniel did not rush. He did not shout. He did not push through the ballroom like officers in a television drama. Instead, he walked with quiet certainty, accompanied by 2 federal agents whose expressions revealed nothing. Most guests still focused on the breaking news playing across the television screens. Only a handful noticed the 3 men entering the lobby outside the ballroom. Harold understood immediately. Months of preparation had reached the point where every movement mattered. Eliana followed his gaze. "Do you know him?" She had noticed Harold watching Daniel. Harold answered carefully. "We went to college together." Her eyes widened. "I didn't know he worked for the government. He doesn't usually talk about work." That, at least, was true. Daniel continued down the corridor without looking toward Harold. Professional distance had to be maintained. To everyone else, they were simply 2 strangers sharing the same hotel. The television anchor continued speaking. 2. Multiple locations remain active crime scenes. Investigators are expected to release additional information later tonight. Guests began leaving in greater numbers. Some hurried toward elevators. Others stood frozen while reading breaking updates on their phones. Executives who had spent years building carefully polished reputations suddenly looked uncertain. Rachel Collins slowly sat down. "I don't understand." Lauren remained standing beside her. "This company has passed every audit." Rachel looked at the television again. "Apparently not." Neither woman noticed Brian Walker's abandoned glass still sitting untouched on a nearby cocktail table. He had left so quickly that even his jacket remained draped over the back of a chair. Hotel employees quietly began collecting abandoned belongings. The celebration had officially ended. Eliana turned toward Harold. "I think we should leave." He nodded. "I agree." They walked slowly toward the ballroom exit. As they entered the lobby, Harold noticed Daniel standing several yards away, speaking with hotel security. Still, Daniel never acknowledged him. Every action remained deliberate. Suddenly, one of the federal agents received a radio transmission. He looked immediately toward Daniel. Daniel's expression changed only slightly. Then all 3 men turned toward the elevators. Before they could move, the elevator doors opened. Nathaniel Sterling stepped out. He was no longer surrounded by executives. No attorney stood beside him. No assistants followed. Only Nathaniel. His tie had been loosened. His jacket remained unbuttoned. For the first time since Harold had ever known him, Nathaniel looked genuinely tired. The lobby became almost completely silent. Nathaniel immediately noticed Daniel. Daniel calmly removed a leather identification wallet from inside his suit jacket. He opened it briefly. "Mr. Sterling." Nathaniel remained perfectly still. "I've been expecting someone." Daniel nodded once. "I imagine you have." Several guests quietly stepped backward. Nobody wanted to become involved. Daniel spoke in the same calm voice he had always used. "We have a federal warrant to search additional company records under your control." Nathaniel answered almost casually. "My attorneys are already cooperating." "I'm glad to hear that," Daniel continued. "We'll also need to schedule an interview." Nathaniel smiled faintly. "I assume I'm free to contact legal counsel?" "Absolutely." Daniel's professionalism never changed. "You are not under arrest." At this time, the final 3 words settled heavily over the lobby. Nathaniel understood their meaning immediately. So did Harold. This investigation had not ended tonight. It had only entered its public stage. Nathaniel slowly nodded. "I'll cooperate." Daniel handed him a sealed envelope. "Your attorney will understand the instructions." Nathaniel accepted it without opening it. For a brief second, his eyes shifted across the lobby. They landed on Eliana, then on Harold standing beside her. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Nathaniel walked towards the couple. Daniel did not interfere. Nothing unlawful was happening. Nathaniel stopped several feet away. "I owe you both an apology." Eliana looked surprised. "Nate," he interrupted gently. "No? I should say it." He looked directly at her. "I turned your birthday into something it never should have become." She answered quietly. "Yes, I did." He lowered his eyes briefly. "I'm sorry." Then he looked toward Harold. "I also owe you one." Harold remained calm. "You don't owe me anything." "I do." Nathaniel's voice sounded different now, less polished, less rehearsed. "I underestimated you," Harold answered simply. "That happens." A faint smile crossed Nathaniel's face, despite everything unfolding around him. "I spent years believing money solved every problem." Harold said nothing. Nathaniel continued. "I thought if I built something large enough, people would never leave." Eliana quietly shook her head. "People aren't companies." "No, they aren't." For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The hotel lobby had become strangely peaceful, despite the television crews gathering outside. Nathaniel finally looked at Eliana once more. "I hope someday you'll remember me before all this." She considered the request carefully. "I already do. I remember the good years, but I also remember why they ended." Nathaniel accepted the answer with a slow nod. "I suppose that's fair." Another federal agent approached Daniel. He whispered something quietly. Daniel glanced toward Nathaniel. "We'll need to continue elsewhere." Nathaniel looked toward Harold one final time. "I genuinely hope you take care of her." Harold answered without hesitation. "I always have." Nathaniel looked at Eliana. "I can finally see that." Without another word, he turned and walked beside Daniel toward a private conference area where attorneys were already waiting. No handcuffs, no shouting, no cameras, only the quiet beginning of a legal process. Harold watched them disappear. Months earlier, he would have expected satisfaction. Instead, he felt something entirely different. Relief. Not because Nathaniel appeared defeated, but because the burden of secrecy was finally ending. Eliana slipped her hand into his. "You knew something." Harold remained silent for several moments. He had promised Daniel, but he had also promised himself that once the investigation became public, he would never lie to his wife again. "I couldn't tell you." She looked at him carefully. "For how long?" "A long time." "Were you involved?" He nodded slowly. "I helped investigators understand the logistics records." She stared at him in complete disbelief. "You helped the federal investigation." "I answered questions. I followed documents. I never wanted recognition." Her eyes filled with emotion. "That's why you stayed so calm." "Partly. You already knew something was coming. I knew there was an investigation. I didn't know tonight would happen like this." She looked back toward the hallway where Daniel had disappeared. "You carried all of that by yourself." "I had to." "Why didn't you trust me?" Harold's expression softened. "It was never about trust. It was about protecting you. If anyone questioned you, I wanted you to be able to tell the truth. I wanted you to honestly say you knew nothing." She slowly understood. Every strange silence, every late evening, every careful answer, every unexplained phone call. None of it had been distance. It had been protection. A tear rolled down her cheek. "I'm so sorry. You don't have anything to apologize for. I doubted you. You were confused. I should have believed you." Harold gently took both of her hands. "You believed the man standing beside you tonight. That was enough." Outside the hotel entrance, flashing blue lights reflected against the glass walls. Reporters hurried across the sidewalk. Camera operators positioned their equipment. The story dominating tomorrow's headlines had only just begun. Harold and Eliana walked slowly toward the exit together. As the valet brought their car around, Harold looked back one last time at the hotel where everything had changed. The birthday party was over. The proposal had failed. The investigation had become public. But he knew the hardest part still lay ahead. Evidence could expose crimes. Witnesses could explain documents. Search warrants could uncover hidden records. Yet none of those things answered the single question the entire country would soon begin asking. Who inside Nathaniel Sterling's organization had warned him that federal agents were coming? The following morning, Columbus awoke to headlines that dominated every television station, newspaper, and business website in the state. Federal investigators had executed coordinated searches across multiple Sterling infrastructure properties. Financial records had been seized. Corporate executives had been summoned for questioning. Reporters replayed the rooftop proposal almost as frequently as they discussed the investigation itself. Two stories had become inseparable. A billionaire's public proposal, a federal corruption inquiry. Harold stood quietly in the kitchen while coffee brewed. Their small home felt wonderfully ordinary. Sunlight entered through the dining room window. The refrigerator hummed softly. Outside, neighbors walked their dogs as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Eliana entered, wearing one of Harold's oversized sweatshirts. Neither of them had slept much. She sat across from him without speaking. Harold poured 2 cups of coffee. Finally, she broke the silence. "I think my phone has received 200 messages. I believe mine stopped counting." She managed a tired smile. "Everyone wants answers." Harold nodded. "They'll have to wait." She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "I called the office this morning." "What did they say?" "Our headquarters is closed." She paused. "Everyone has been instructed not to destroy documents." Harold recognized the significance immediately. Federal investigators had secured preservation orders. That meant every email, contract, invoice, and financial record now mattered. Eliana watched his expression. "You already knew that would happen." "I expected something similar." She slowly shook her head. "I still can't believe you carried this secret for months." Neither could Harold. Looking back, the investigation seemed both incredibly long and surprisingly brief. Every anonymous envelope, every warehouse photograph, every encrypted message, every careful conversation with Daniel. It all felt distant now. His phone vibrated. "Daniel." Harold answered. "Good morning." Daniel sounded exhausted but steady. "You're home?" "Yes." "Good." Daniel hesitated. "I wanted you to hear this from me instead of the news." Harold remained silent. "The evidence teams recovered substantially more than we expected." Harold closed his eyes briefly. "So the warrants worked?" "They did." "What about Nathaniel?" "He has retained counsel." "I assumed he would." Daniel continued. "No charges yet. The investigation continues." Harold understood. Public attention often moved faster than legal procedure. Evidence still had to be examined. Documents still required verification. Witnesses still needed interviews. "How's Eliana?" "She's beside me." "Tell her she did nothing wrong." "I will." Daniel paused again. "And Harold?" "Yes. You can finally live your own life again." The call ended. Harold stared at the silent phone for several seconds. Live your own life again. He hadn't realized how much of himself had been devoted to secrecy, until someone told him it was over. Eliana looked at him. "Daniel?" He nodded. "The search has recovered a lot." She quietly released a long breath. "I almost feel guilty for being relieved." "You don't need to." "No." "I suppose I don't." After breakfast, they decided to walk through their neighborhood. Neither wanted to spend another hour watching television. Fresh air felt necessary. Summer flowers lined front gardens. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalks. An elderly couple waved as they passed. Life continued exactly as it had before. Harold appreciated that more than ever. As they reached a neighborhood park, Eliana stopped beside a wooden bench. "This is where you proposed." Harold smiled. "I remember. You were nervous." "I was terrified." She laughed for the first time since the birthday party. "You almost dropped the ring." "I did drop the ring. It rolled under the bench. And you started laughing." "I couldn't help it." The memory felt wonderfully imperfect. No photographers, no audience, no expensive stage. Just two ordinary people beginning a life together. Eliana looked toward him. "I've been thinking about something." "What?" "I spent years believing success meant earning bigger titles. Bigger offices. Bigger opportunities." She looked around the quiet park. "But yesterday? None of those things mattered." Harold listened without interrupting. "You arrived carrying flowers. Nate arrived carrying diamonds." She smiled gently. "I chose the flowers." Harold reached for her hand. "I never wanted to compete with him." "I know." "You never did." She squeezed his hand. "That's why you won." Harold shook his head. "This wasn't about winning." "No. It was about staying." Her words settled deeply inside him. Staying. Through uncertainty, through silence, through misunderstanding, through months when nobody could see what he was doing. That had always been enough. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. Harold opened the front door to find Lauren Mitchell standing on the porch. She held a small bakery box. "I hope I'm not interrupting?" "Not at all." She stepped inside. "I brought birthday cake." Eliana laughed. "A day late." "The bakery was closed last night." They sat together at the kitchen table. Lauren looked noticeably more relaxed than she had the previous evening. "I resigned this morning." Eliana looked surprised. "You did?" Lauren nodded. "I don't know what the company becomes after this, but I know I need a fresh start." Nobody argued. The decision made sense. Lauren looked toward Harold. "I owe you an apology." Harold frowned slightly. "For what?" "I judged you. I thought you were too quiet. I thought Nate deserved another chance." She smiled awkwardly. "I was very wrong." Harold answered kindly. "We all make decisions based on what we know." "I didn't know enough." "None of us did." Lauren looked at Eliana. "You married a remarkable man." Eliana smiled warmly. "I know." For a while, they simply shared coffee and birthday cake. No discussion of investigations. No discussion of billionaires. Only ordinary conversation. It felt almost healing. When Lauren finally left, she hugged Eliana tightly. "I'm glad you're okay." "So am I." As evening approached, Harold stepped into the backyard carrying a small gardening shovel. The white lilies from the birthday bouquet still rested in fresh water inside the house. He carefully selected one healthy bulb that could be replanted. Eliana followed him outside. "What are you doing?" "Planting something." She watched quietly as he knelt beside the fence. The soil was soft from recent rain. He gently covered the bulb with earth. "You think it'll grow?" He smiled. "I hope so." She knelt beside him. "It seems appropriate." "Why?" "Because flowers don't bloom overnight." They take patience. Harold looked at the freshly covered soil. So do marriages. She leaned against his shoulder. So does trust. He nodded slowly. Yes. They remained there and together as the sun gradually disappeared below the rooftops. For the first time in many months, Harold felt no need to check encrypted messages. No anonymous envelopes waited in the mailbox. No coded phone calls interrupted dinner. Only peace. Yet even as the evening settled around them, one unanswered question continued quietly occupying Harold's thoughts. Federal investigators had uncovered enormous amounts of evidence. Search warrants had succeeded. Witnesses had cooperated. But Daniel had never answered the question that still lingered in Harold's mind. If someone inside Sterling Infrastructure had warned Nathaniel before the searches had that unidentified insider truly disappeared, or was that person still free, quietly watching everything from somewhere much closer than anyone realized? 3 months later, the lilies bloomed. Harold noticed them early one Saturday morning while watering the small garden beside the fence. The white blossoms stood quietly in the sunlight. They were not perfect. A few petals curved unevenly. One stem leaned slightly after a summer storm. Yet they were healthy, alive, growing exactly where he had planted them after Eliana's birthday. He smiled. Behind him, the back door opened. Eliana stepped outside, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. They made it. Harold looked back. They did. She walked over and stood beside him. I wasn't sure they would. Neither was I. She handed him one of the mugs. For several moments they admired the flowers without speaking. The silence felt comfortable. Unlike the months of secrecy that had once filled their home, this silence required no explanation. Life had slowly settled into a new rhythm. Sterling Infrastructure had suspended operations pending restructuring. Several executives had resigned. Others had accepted plea agreements after consulting their attorneys. Investigators continued reviewing thousands of financial documents recovered during the coordinated searches. Nathaniel Sterling had remained out of public view. His legal team issued carefully worded statements. The investigation continued. Harold rarely watched the news anymore. He no longer needed daily updates. His part in the story had ended long before the headlines began. His phone buzzed softly. A message from Daniel. Case progressing well. Thought you'd appreciate knowing the anonymous insider has now been identified. No further risk to you or Eliana. Thank you again. Harold read the message twice before locking the screen. He felt something inside him finally relax. The final uncertainty had disappeared. The unidentified source was no longer unknown. Whoever had leaked information inside the company had been found through evidence rather than suspicion. There would be no lingering shadow following them into the future. Eliana noticed his expression. Good news, he nodded. Very good. She smiled. I like seeing that look on your face. What look? The one that says you're finally finished carrying something heavy. Harold looked toward the lilies again. I think I am. Later that afternoon, they drove across Columbus to visit Harold's parents. His mother insisted on preparing far more food than 2 guests could possibly eat. His father spent nearly an hour explaining improvements he wanted to make to his workshop. Nothing had changed there. Everything had changed there. Harold appreciated both realities. During dessert, his mother looked at Eliana. I saw you on television. Eliana laughed nervously. I wish you hadn't. His mother reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I wasn't watching because of the proposal. I was watching because I wanted to see whether you smiled when Harold walked over. Eliana blinked. I did. You did. His mother smiled warmly. That told me everything I needed to know. Driving home that evening, Eliana remained unusually quiet. What are you thinking? She looked out the passenger window. Your mother is wise. She usually is. I spent so much time worrying about appearances. She turned toward him. She noticed something much simpler. Harold smiled. People who love you usually do. A week later, Daniel invited Harold to lunch, not as an investigator, as an old college friend. They met at a small diner they had visited years before graduation. No confidential folders rested on the table. No encrypted phones appeared. Only hamburgers, coffee, and two friends catching up after an extraordinary chapter of life. Daniel leaned back in the booth. You know, when this started, I wasn't sure you'd agree to help. Harold shrugged. I wasn't sure either. What changed your mind? Harold thought carefully before answering. I kept asking myself one question. What question? If I ignored what I saw, who would eventually pay the price? Daniel nodded slowly. That answer matters. It did. Daniel smiled. You never tried to become a hero. I never wanted to. That's probably why you were so effective. Harold laughed quietly. I was mostly confused. So was everyone. Daniel reached into his briefcase. Harold instinctively laughed. I thought we were done with folders. We are. Daniel removed a framed certificate. It carried no government seal visible to the public, only a simple letter of appreciation from the investigative task force. For your integrity and confidential assistance. Harold accepted it with surprise. I wasn't expecting this. You weren't supposed to, Daniel smiled. But I thought your grandchildren might enjoy seeing it someday. Harold laughed. I think I'll hide it in the attic. I suspected you would. When they left the restaurant, they shook hands the same way they had years earlier after graduation. No ceremony, no speeches, just respect. That evening, Harold placed the framed letter inside a drawer in his home office instead of hanging it on a wall. Recognition had never been the reason he helped. Protecting what mattered had been enough. As autumn slowly approached, life continued moving forward. Eliana accepted a position with a different company whose leadership emphasized transparency rather than prestige. She smiled more often. She worked fewer evenings. Sometimes she surprised Harold by arriving home early simply to cook dinner together. One Friday evening, they visited the neighborhood florist. The owner recognized them immediately. White lilies again? Harold smiled. Always. The florist wrapped the bouquet carefully. As they walked home, Eliana looked at the flowers. You know. What? I used to think diamonds lasted forever. Harold looked at her with quiet amusement. And now? She lifted the bouquet slightly. Diamonds can be locked away. They can be sold. They can even become evidence. She smiled warmly. But flowers? They have to be cared for. They remind you every day that beautiful things survive because someone chooses to keep them alive. Harold slipped his hand into hers. I couldn't have said it better. When they reached home, she placed the lilies into the same glass vase that had stood on their dining table for years. The evening sunlight illuminated the white petals. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left that needed explaining. Months earlier, Harold had arrived at a birthday party carrying ordinary flowers, while another man carried extraordinary wealth. Many people watching had assumed they already knew how that story would end. They had been wrong, because love had never been measured by the size of a diamond. Trust had never been purchased by money. Respect had never been created by public performances. The strongest marriage in the room had belonged to the man who quietly kept his promises when nobody was watching. Outside, the lilies in the garden continued blooming through the changing season. Inside, another bouquet brightened the dining room. One had grown from a bulb carefully planted in difficult soil. The other had been chosen with the same quiet devotion that had begun long before investigations headlines or billionaires. In the end, the flowers truly lasted longer than the diamonds. And for Harold and Eliana, that was the only ending that had ever mattered.